Imagine this. You wake up one morning not in terror, not in chaos, but in silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful but sterile. The walls are familiar, the ceiling predictable, the air still. The coffee brews at the same time it did yesterday. The same creak in the floorboard beneath your heel, the same route to work, the same glances from the same people whose names you never learned. Nothing is wrong, exactly, and yet something inside you whispers, not screams, just whispers, "Is this it?" You brush it off. Routine is comfort, predictability is peace, stability is success. These are the mantras you've been told. These are the bricks you've used to build your life. And yet, beneath all the calm and control, something rots in the basement of your being, a quiet discontent, a subtle spiritual asphyxiation. You are safe, but you are not alive. What if the greatest danger wasn't trauma, failure, or chaos, but comfort? What if the things you cherish most, security, routine, and familiarity, were the very forces suffocating your potential? What if the warm cocoon you've spun around your life is less a sanctuary and more a slow-moving sarcophagus? How can you tell the difference between peace and paralysis? We often think of danger as something sharp and loud, an accident, a betrayal, a loss. But what if the most lethal threat wears the mask of ease? What if the slow erosion of your courage feels paradoxically like relief? Picture this, a lion born in captivity. It has never tasted blood from a fresh kill, never felt the savagery of the hunt, never needed to run for its life or assert its dominance. It is well fed, groomed, admired behind glass. It is safe, but it is no longer a lion. It is a decoration, a ghost of its own instinct. Is it alive, or merely not dead? Now turn that image inward. What parts of you have been domesticated by routine? What passions have you pacified with predictable days? What wild hunger have you traded for comfort? You say you're tired, but are you tired from effort, or from the weight of unused potential? The irony is unbearable. Everything you were taught to desire, stability, control, efficiency, may be the very anesthetic that numbs your deepest instincts. Like a plant placed in the shade to protect it from harsh sunlight, you've survived. But stop growing. The pot is porcelain, the soil is moist, the lighting soft, and yet your roots itch to shatter the container. Why does fulfillment so often live outside the lines of what's reasonable? You don't fear death, not really. What you fear is unlived life. Waking up at 60 with no scars to prove you tried. Looking in the mirror and realizing the person staring back is a collage of compromises. Knowing you built a fortress so strong not even your dreams could get in. The world doesn't chain you, your comfort does, because comfort is seductive. It flatters your ego, telling you you've made it. It dulls your ambition, whispering that you're doing well enough. It isolates you from the unknown, dressing fear in the costume of logic, and over time, without warning, it starts to kill things, your curiosity, your courage, your appetite for risk. But you don't notice, because dying in comfort is quiet. There's no bang, just a whimper, 1,000 small decisions to stay safe. To not speak up, to not try, to not love wildly, risk rejection, fall hard, or rise scarred. You become a museum of might-have-beens, a biography authored by fear. And here's the most brutal paradox. Escaping your comfort zone is not just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. It feels wrong, dangerous, even selfish. That's how deeply the lie has embedded itself. You've mistaken survival for meaning. You've confused calm for clarity. You've learned to fear pain more than emptiness. But tell me, what if pain is the doorway to purpose? What if the only way out is through? Through the fear, through the failure, through the fire of becoming, not around it, not above it, through. And if so, what happens if you never go? What would it mean to live your entire life without ever meeting the person you could have been? What would it cost to stay here in this tepid, tame, slow-burning state until the end? No alarms will ring, no signs will warn you. Comfort will not betray you loudly. It will hold your hand while you wither. But something in you, maybe even now, has started to stir. A tiny revolt, a flicker of rebellion against the padded cell of your routines, against the smiling executioner named comfort. And it's asking one question, one impossible, unbearable question. What if everything you've been avoiding is exactly what you need to become fully alive? There is a peculiar irony in the human condition. You crave freedom, yet you build cages. You dream of transformation, yet cling to sameness. You speak of greatness in hushed tones like it's a dangerous secret. And in the quiet corridors of your psyche, you keep asking, why do I feel so trapped when I'm the one holding the key? This is not laziness. This is not weakness. This is something far deeper, more ancient, a war between the primal and the civilized, between the known self and the self that has not yet emerged. Carl Jung called it the shadow, that unseen, unlived part of you that you repress in exchange for social acceptance and predictable outcomes. It doesn't vanish, it waits. It grows restless in your dreams, peeks through in your anger, and whispers in your moments of regret. You feel its pull when you say, there must be more than this, and its silence when you ignore the call. The comfort zone is a psychic compromise. It's the place you create when your instincts for growth clash with your fear of the unknown. You build routines not just out of habit, but out of existential defense. Because the unfamiliar doesn't just threaten your safety, it threatens your identity. Think of it this way: to grow, something in you must die. A version of yourself, your beliefs, your habits, your self-image must be dismantled. That feels like annihilation. So instead of leaping into the unknown, you bargain with life. You say, let me stay here just a little longer. I'll go after that dream tomorrow. I'll confront that fear next year. But years pass. The bargain becomes a sentence. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free, that our very existence forces us to choose, to define ourselves moment by moment. But choice is terrifying when it carries real weight. So, we often retreat into bad faith, the psychological act of denying our own freedom by hiding behind roles, norms, and external structures. We say, I can't, when we mean, I'm afraid. We say, that's just the way things are, when we mean, I no longer know who I'd be if I changed. Your comfort zone is not just a behavioral pattern. It's a metaphysical illusion, a story you tell yourself to avoid confronting the chaos of possibility. Arthur Schopenhauer described human desire as an endless cycle. The moment a need is fulfilled, another rises in its place. Thus, lasting comfort is a myth, and yet you pursue it like a holy grail. Why? Because society rewards the illusion. It exalts security over meaning, conformity over authenticity. The dream is sold to you, prepackaged. Education, job, marriage, mortgage, retirement. Follow the steps. Don't deviate. Don't question. But beneath that polished surface is a system engineered to numb you. Aldous Huxley warned of this in Brave New World. A society where suffering is anesthetized and distraction replaces depth. There's no tyranny in the traditional sense, just endless comfort, endless stimulation, endless sedation. And here you are, wired for exploration, for struggle, for becoming, reduced to managing emails, scrolling for validation, performing identities you no longer believe in. The root of the problem is not external, it is philosophical. You were taught that the goal of life is to feel good. But Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said otherwise. He wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how," meaning not comfort is the axis of a fulfilled life. And meaning is not found within your comfort zone. It is forged in discomfort, in sacrifice, in confronting the abyss. But here's the tragic twist. You've been conditioned to treat discomfort as a sign of failure. If something feels hard, uncertain, painful, it must be wrong. So you avoid, you rationalize, you medicate. And all the while, the part of you that longs to expand is suffocating under the weight of this cultural lie. There's a reason Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And he didn't mean why in a shallow sense. He meant purpose that emerges from embracing struggle, from saying yes to the chaos of life, not hiding from it. He also warned of the last man, a being who seeks only comfort, avoids all risk, and lives a long, boring life. That's the final form of the comfort-addicted soul. Safe, numb, irrelevant. You are not that, but you could become it. And that possibility should scare you more than any risk, because the scariest monsters aren't out there in the world. They're the ones you birth through inaction. The unspoken dream, the love never pursued, the art never attempted, the apology never made, the truth never lived. This isn't about recklessness. This is about alignment. There is a deeper intelligence in you, a kind of inner compass. It doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in feelings of unrest, in moments of awe, in the ache of unrealized potential. When you ignore it, you feel off. When you follow it, your life begins to shimmer with a strange kind of electricity. And here's the twist. The longer you stay in comfort, the harder it becomes to hear that voice. It doesn't shout. It waits. And if you drown it out long enough, you may come to believe it never existed. But it does. And it's calling you now, not with urgency, but with invitation, to step into the unknown, to rupture the routines, to die to the version of yourself that no longer fits. Will you answer, or will you let another year pass in the name of caution? Because while you weigh your options, the clock does not stop. Every second you hesitate, the self you were meant to become slips further away, not with malice, but with indifference. The universe offers no guarantees, only possibilities, and all of them live outside your comfort zone. You don't feel the damage immediately. It arrives subtly, like the way a room grows dark, not with a flip of a switch, but by the slow, imperceptible dimming of the sun. One day, you look around and realize something essential has faded. Not just passion, not just direction, something deeper. The sense that your life means something. But by then, the damage has already rooted itself in the architecture of your thoughts. You mistake numbness for normalcy. You call stagnation stability. You label the weight in your chest as just tiredness and dismiss the gnawing in your gut as just stress. You've adapted, not to a hard life, but to a small one. This is the unspoken consequence of a comfort-driven existence. It's not the external losses that haunt you. missed promotions, forgotten ambitions. It's the internal erosion, the shrinking of your imagination, the atrophy of your will, the slow, quiet death of awe. And the worst part, the world keeps applauding you, because comfort has become the currency of modern success. You're not encouraged to break free. You're rewarded for staying put. You're told that risk is irresponsible, that uncertainty is reckless. You're praised for being consistent, reliable, low maintenance. Your quiet suffering becomes invisible behind curated smiles and calendar alerts. But beneath that polished exterior is a war zone. Your neural circuitry, evolutionarily wired for challenge, for survival, for exploration, starts to malfunction when there is no real threat, no real tension, no real quest. The human brain, when understimulated by meaning and novelty, begins to self-cannibalize. Not physically, psychologically. Neuroscientists call it learned helplessness, a condition in which a person, having become so accustomed to perceived limitations, stops attempting to escape them, even when escape is fully possible. You don't try because you've convinced yourself that effort is pointless. You internalize the cage. Even the fire within you, your drive, your hunger, your potential, becomes a liability in such a state, because every time it rises, it contradicts the life you've built. Every time it sparks, it threatens to burn the false peace you've grown dependent on. So what do? You extinguish it, again and again, until your soul learns to stop trying. This is the invisible tragedy. Most people don't fail, they fade, they don't crash, they coast, they don't explode. They evaporate slowly, becoming shadows of who they could have been. And society makes it easy. In fact, it makes it addictive. Your comfort zone is reinforced by every app that steals your attention, every algorithm that predicts your next thought, every purchase that gives you 10 seconds of dopamine. You're not just being numbed, you're being optimized into obedience. Your discomfort with discomfort is being exploited. You no longer have to sit with uncertainty because Google gives you every answer. You no longer have to risk rejection because social media lets you curate approval. You don't need to seek adventure. It's delivered in pixels, pre-filtered and looped. And while your primal mind rots from underuse, your civilized self beams proudly at your well-balanced life. But something else happens in the shadows of all this stimulation. You begin to lose depth. Shallow pleasures replace deep joy. Convenience replaces conviction. Distraction becomes your default state. You begin to fear silence, because in silence you might hear your own voice again. And that voice would ask questions you don't want to answer. What are you doing with your one wild and precious life? When did comfort become more important than courage? What would you attempt if you weren't afraid of starting over? These questions don't just haunt, they accuse. Because somewhere within you, a wiser self remembers. Remembers when you were younger, bolder, less edited. Remembers the promises you made to yourself before rent, before deadlines, before compromise disguised itself as maturity. This is not nostalgia. This is truth, a buried one. The consequences of ignoring it are not always dramatic. Often they're silent killers, chronic boredom, low-grade depression, existential fatigue, the feeling that life is happening at you, not through you, that your days are filled, but your soul is empty. You find yourself scrolling more, drinking more, avoiding more, because it's easier to stay anesthetized than to wake up and realize you've settled, not by accident, by design. Cognitive biases only tighten the noose. The status quo bias convinces you that what you're doing now must be better than the alternative because it's familiar. The sunk cost fallacy tells you to stay the course, even if it's wrong, because you've already invested so much time. The comfort bias tricks you into believing that whatever feels easy must be right. But the truth is simple. The longer you stay in your comfort zone, the more it shrinks. What once felt like a palace becomes a prison. What once gave you peace now demands your obedience. And eventually, there's no room left to grow, not because the world is small, but because you've become too afraid to stretch. And here's where the deeper crisis begins, not just personal, but collective. When a generation stays comfortable, it stops creating, it stops revolting, it stops dreaming. It becomes passive, tame, predictable. The world loses poetry, it loses madness, it loses art, because comfort breeds consumption, not creation. And without creation, without risk, without the raw agony of becoming, what is life really? A cycle of distractions, a polished resume, a quiet funeral, or something more. That's the real danger of the comfort zone. It doesn't just rob you of success, it robs you of yourself, bit by bit, quietly, politely, until one day you forget that you were ever wild. But the world doesn't need more safe people, it needs you, fully alive, fully awake, fully defiant against the quiet death of sameness. And maybe, just maybe, there's still time. Because even now you feel it, don't you? That pull, that rage, that hunger to rebel. There comes a moment, not marked by clocks or calendars, but by an internal rupture, when you realize something intolerable. You've been sleepwalking through your own life. And that moment, it's not quiet, it's volcanic. It doesn't whisper change, it demands it. Not politely, not gradually, but with a kind of primal howl that shakes the very scaffolding of your identity. That's the rebellion, not against society, not against your parents or your job or your past, against the lie you've told yourself for years that this is good enough. But how do you rebel against something that's so deeply woven into your day-to-day? How do you break free from a prison with invisible walls, a prison you helped decorate? You begin with a single radical act. You stop lying to yourself. You stop calling boredom peace. You stop calling stagnation security. You stop pretending you're not capable of more just because more terrifies you. The truth is this: the comfort zone doesn't crumble from force. It disintegrates the moment you dare to look at it honestly. And what you'll see isn't shelter, it's seduction. A siren song keeping you docile, predictable, and half alive. And you were not born for half life. You were born for becoming, which means shedding your skin again and again, until what is false burns away, and what is real rises in its place. Rebellion begins with awareness, but it thrives on movement. You take the first step, any step toward the unknown. You make the phone call. You quit the thing that's rotting your spirit. You sign up for something you're not ready for. You speak the truth you've buried in politeness. And here's the paradox: you don't need to feel brave to do brave things. Courage is not an emotion, it's a decision. You act despite the trembling. You move despite the uncertainty. You leap not because you know where you'll land, but because staying still has become more dangerous than falling. History is littered with the bones of those who waited for the right time. But the rebels, the ones who shaped the world, the ones who became themselves fully, they moved when everything inside them said, wait. They understood something most people miss. The longer you wait to live fully, the more skilled you become at dying slowly. Consider the Stoics. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Their rebellion wasn't wild abandon. It was discipline, ruthless clarity, saying no to distraction, saying yes to purpose, even if it meant discomfort. Especially if it meant discomfort. Or, look at the artists who bled through their work. Frida Kahlo, Van Gogh, Nina Simone. They didn't find time to create. They carved it from bone. They didn't wait for permission to live honestly. They risked rejection, obscurity, madness. Because to not create would have been worse than failure. This rebellion doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, invisible, philosophical, like when you wake up and finally say, "This is not who I want to be." That sentence has started revolutions, saved marriages, ended addictions, and birthed masterpieces. But how do you sustain the rebellion once it begins? You stop measuring your progress with the metrics that kept you trapped. You stop asking, "Is this comfortable?" and start asking, "Is this true?" You stop waiting to be fearless and start practicing resilience. And you fall in love, not with outcomes, but with the tension of transformation. You understand what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos is sacred. That confusion you feel, that fear, that's not failure. That's the friction of a soul waking up. Your rebellion must become a way of life, not a phase, not a weekend retreat, not a motivational sprint, but a conscious choice made every day to reject the easy path in favor of the meaningful one. You create your own rites of passage, not by waiting for some elder or institution to validate you, but by becoming your own initiator. You walk into fear alone and come out on the other side, altered, humbled, alive. And no, it won't be easy. Your old life will resist. Your friends may not understand. Your own mind will try to seduce you back into comfort. It will whisper, "Why bother? You're not special. This won't last." That's the voice of the dying self. Don't argue with it. Just keep moving. Make discomfort your compass. Make uncertainty your training ground. And most importantly, start telling yourself a better story. Because the most powerful rebellion of all is a narrative rebellion. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start seeing yourself as the author of a myth, a warrior, a creator, a force of nature. You ask not, "What should I do with my life?" but, "What story would I be proud to die inside of?" That changes everything. You start to train your body like a vessel of purpose, not vanity. You start to speak not to impress, but to liberate. You start to show up, not just for others, but for the future version of yourself who is counting on you to stop stalling. And when you feel like quitting, when the pain of growth becomes unbearable, you remember this. This is what freedom feels like at first. Raw, unfamiliar, borderless. But keep going, and you'll find something astonishing. The real comfort isn't in safety. It's in knowing you've chosen a path of your own design. That you didn't play it small, that you didn't abandon yourself, that you lived, not perfectly, but fiercely, relentlessly, and on your own terms. This is not the end of the rebellion, it's just the beginning. And soon you'll discover something you never expected. The greatest comfort of all is becoming who you truly are. There comes a silence at the edge of transformation, not the silence of boredom, not the muteness of fear, but a profound stillness, the kind that arrives only after the storm, when all illusions have been torn away and you're standing naked before the raw truth of your existence. And in that silence, you finally hear it, the voice you've been drowning out your whole life. The one that's older than fear, deeper than doubt, and impossibly familiar. It doesn't shout, it doesn't plead, it simply speaks. You were never meant to be safe. You were meant to be sovereign. Everything in your life begins to rearrange itself around this truth, not instantly, not without resistance, but unmistakably, like tectonic plates shifting, like a soul cracking open to let the light in. Because the final, most powerful realization is this: the comfort zone is not a location, it's an identity. It's the version of yourself you agreed to become in exchange for approval. It's the persona you polished so the world would accept you, so your parents wouldn't worry, so your teachers would praise you, so your friends would stay. It is the carefully constructed mask behind which your wildest truth was imprisoned. And every time you stayed quiet when your spirit wanted to roar, you reinforced that identity. Every time you chose convenience over curiosity, you engraved the borders of the mask deeper. Every time you denied your own potential because someone else couldn't see it, you sealed yourself tighter inside. But here's the sacred secret. You are not that identity. You never were. You are not your job title. You are not your resume. You are not the opinions others project onto you, or the limitations you inherited from a frightened world. You are the space beneath all that. You are the witness, the dreamer, the architect. You are what Viktor Frankl called the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And once you understand that, truly feel it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, everything changes. The comfort zone becomes laughable. Why would a lion beg to stay in a cage? Just because the bars are made of gold. Why would a sky long for ceilings? Why would a soul, eternal and burning, ever agree to live on a leash? The truth is terrifying, but it's also liberating. The only thing ever holding you back was your agreement to be held back. Not your parents, not society, not the economy, not fate. You. You were the jailer, you were the prisoner, and you are the one who holds the key. But with that realization comes a deeper responsibility. You can no longer blame the world for your limitations. You can no longer hide behind "I didn't know." You can no longer numb out and call it self-care, because now you do know. And once you know the truth, your silence becomes complicity. So what do? You dismantle the false self, not with violence, but with precision. You start questioning every story you've ever told yourself about who you are. You start living not from expectation, but from essence. You start treating your time as holy. You start loving like it's your last day on earth. You start creating as if your life depends on it, because it does. And slowly, your real life begins to unfold, not the scripted one, not the one pre-approved by others, but the life that aches to be born through you. It won't be easy. In fact, you will be tested. Again and again, you will face rejection. You will feel loneliness. You will lose things that once defined you. But in that fire, something purer will emerge. You will begin to recognize yourself in the mirror, not the edited version, not the version others like best, but the warrior, the poet, the storm. You'll feel an odd kind of grief, not for what you've lost, but for what you almost settled for. And then something sacred will happen. You'll stop fearing death, because you'll realize that the real death, the one you should have been terrified of all along, was not in some hospital bed years from now, but in the quiet, daily betrayal of your own soul. And you'll know, finally, with unshakable clarity, that you didn't just survive your comfort zone. You transcended it. You became the person you were always meant to be. Not because it was safe, but because it was true. And in that truth, you will taste a freedom unlike anything this world can offer. A freedom not of escape, but of embodiment. Not of running away, but of returning to yourself, to the one who was never meant to be tamed. This is the final realization, the ultimate truth, the forbidden wisdom that no one teaches you. Your life only begins the moment you stop trying to protect it. Let the fire come. Let the mask burn. Let the old identity collapse. And from the ashes, rise, not reborn, reclaimed. This world does not need more polished, well-adjusted people fitting neatly into broken systems. It needs you, unapologetically alive. It needs your art, your madness, your fury, your vision, your truth. So if you've heard anything in this journey, hear this. The comfort zone is not your friend. It is a slow death with soft pillows. Wake up, stand up, and walk out the door of the small life you were handed, into the untamed wilderness of who you really are. Because in the end, the scariest thing isn't risking it all and failing. It's never risking anything and realizing too late. You never really lived,